I got a new nickname this morning, which is Philipp the Speaker, which I would like a lot. So if you can refer to me like that, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so first of all, is everybody comfortable? This room was not really meant to hold that many people, as you might notice. So I hope everybody can sit the way you are sitting for 20 minutes. I'll try to get it all done in that time. So yes, I'm speaking about the topic of tradition today, and the first question that probably arises is why me? What do I think I have to tell you about the subject? And as was mentioned before, so I was lucky enough to live and work in 3 different countries and cultures, in New York 10 years, and then in Tokyo before coming back to Munich, which is my home city. But I don't think that qualifies me because I've talked to so many international people here today, so nothing special about that. But I do think, in combination with my job, which is industrial designer, where you basically are supposed to work on new things and think about what the future will look like and what will be the products and the services of the future. We do have a way of looking in the future, but traditions, I think, is really what drives countries and cultures' way of how they look into the future. So I realized in my little world tour that there was a very big difference between working in America, in Japan, or in Germany when you talk about what now is the big buzzword, innovation, because the cultures are so different. So that's what I would like to share with you. And to get it out of the way, a little bit technical stuff. So if you look it up, and I did, traditions is, the definition for traditions is basically it's the building blocks of culture, and rituals are the building blocks of tradition. I'm going to use these terms loosely. I think they're all very connected and kind of overlapping. So I'm talking about traditions, but of course it's a lot about culture, actually. I also would like to point out that there's, for me, if you talk about traditions, there's really 2 levels of talking about traditions. One is the individual level, what does tradition mean and do for an individual? And the other one is the group level, what does it do for society and how does it affect society? And to explain that a little bit more in depth, on the individual level, I think traditions are really what keeps us sane as people, especially today, because we have so many inputs and so many decisions to make in our head, and tradition is always a fallback solution for everything, where you can say, I just do it because it's done that way. You don't need to think about it. So it keeps you gives you a little bit space in your head. And it allows you to kind of hand off responsibility for your life to a higher power, which doesn't necessarily need to be religious, as you can see in this example. There's a reason why 3 million people every year for 2 weeks run around in Munich in these pants. It's not that they all love these pants, but it's, they think they are connecting with something bigger and being a part of a tradition. So that's the individual side of traditions from my point of view. On a society level, I think tradition is really what keeps societies going and functioning, and they kind of the soft power of creating structure. Not necessarily, but could be, okay. No, but so the point is that, being the soft power and the hard power obviously being government, police and such, traditions help societies organize and run, and they put people in place, if you will want to say so. And, that's good for this guy, which is not Kim Jong-un, and not so good for the guys down there, because it's just, you ask yourself, why am I here? Well, tradition, and that's not really a good answer, to be honest, anymore. So, okay, so now back to me, which I love talking about, obviously. So my personal story. So I grew up in Munich, I'm from Munich, and I went to high school in Munich, and what I noticed when I got closer to high school, finishing high school, I found, and looking around what I want to do with my life, and I found I had no idea. I really didn't know. I didn't know what I want to do, and I didn't think, I had enough information. And I found that the German education system is extremely typical German in the sense that it was, which by the way I should quick cut. Everything I say is very subjective. It's my opinion, obviously, and I'm old, so things change. So things might be different today, but when I experienced that, or something. Okay, some things don't change. So those are two things I should have said in the beginning, but it's not too late yet, I think. I found the German, it's really interesting because when you ask people in the world what is typical German, it's always, oh, they're so efficient. And if you look at the German education system, it's the most efficient thing in the world. The idea is there's a job, somebody has to be prepared for that, so how do we get this person ready for this job? So what it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you hey, who are you? What can you do with your life? How can you, try different things? Maybe, do something that nobody has done before. No room for that, no time for that. There's jobs to fill and we need to get there. So in that sense, I felt really left alone because everybody around me seemed to exactly know what they want to do and I had no clue. So I was like, okay, something is wrong. It's probably me. That's, when you're young, you're like, oh, it's my fault. And so actually, I kind of gave in to the efficiency, but I'll talk about that in a second. The one thing that I also noticed about the German education system, and that's another thing I don't know if it had changed now, if you used to open a magazine or you go online and you find German news websites, there's always this one article about how to deal with your gap year in your CV when you're applying for a job. It's like the worst thing you can have is a gap in your CV, which is like the coolest thing to have because it means you kind of take time and look around and try to find yourself. So I always, still I get really angry when I see these articles about it's the biggest shame to have not done something efficient for a year and not been going for a job, and you have to hide that. So I find that really frustrating. So as I said, I gave into the system. So I did a 2-year apprenticeship with a bank, which was the worst thing I could have done, and I'm not going to talk about it, but it really set me up for my next step where I was like, okay, this is not working for me, so I might be onto something that I say that I don't enjoy this kind of system that I'm in. And I decided to study design, and I looked around and I said, if I do it all the way. So I applied for a school in New York, Parsons School of Design, which is actually a fashion design school, I later found out. Wasn't that important. They did have a product design department, and that's where I went. So, details. But I was really proud of myself. I was still in Germany. I got an acceptance, and I was ready to go over there. And then I got a little nervous because, so it was 95, and I ended up going to New York, and, I watched a lot of MTV, and I knew how cool all these New Yorkers were, and I was from Munich and a bit dorky, and not sure if I was ready for that adventure. So, I was a little intimidated, and I was lucky. I have family in New York, so my aunt lives there, and she has 5 grown-up kids who took care of me. So I was not going somewhere totally distant, but still I felt like I'm really jumping into something pretty intimidating. And then, so it was always like, okay, how is it going to be to meet when you go out and you meet New Yorker and you discuss and talk to New Yorkers. And the first thing I learned is in New York there are no New Yorkers, because everybody's like me, and everybody was coming from somewhere and has a story to tell and is somehow there transient and just coming through, which was pretty cool. But you do meet Americans who are basically doing sightseeing in New York, and when you meet them and you talk to them, it was really interesting because I also thought, well, how are they going to look at me as a European, as a German? And what happens more often than not, and this is what we talked about, is like you're like, so where are you from? And I'm like, oh, I'm from Germany. He's like, oh my God, me too. And I'm like, really? How come you have no accent? And then you talk, and then there's like, oh yeah, my great-great-great-grandfather came from this little town, Stuttgart. Have you ever heard of it? And I was like, maybe. So, it's a real common occurrence, and we talked about it. For Germans, it happens a lot. For Irish, it happens for some reason all the time. So everybody in New York, which is really cool, or in America, I think keeps this kind of contact to their heritage. And it's like this line that they have to hold on to, and the traditions that they kind of using to give them structure in their life. And from our point of view, it's sometimes a little superficial, and it's like, oh yeah, and they're going to talk to me about beer and sausage. But it's something for them to give to be able to hold on to. And I think they have really the luxury that they have two traditions they can choose from. So most Americans have this German, Irish, whatever background, and then they have the American tradition and the American culture that they also kind of refer to. And obviously, as I talked before about the individual level and the society level, on an individual level, I think they still identify with their former heritage a lot. But in a society, it wouldn't work because if everybody brings in different traditions, you just have deadlock and craziness. So what really happens is that's where the American tradition, the American culture comes in and forms. And so I was obviously really interested in like, what is American culture? I want to learn all about it. And so the obvious one is Thanksgiving. Everybody knows Thanksgiving, American traditional holiday. And I wasn't really that interested in joining Thanksgiving dinners because it sounded a little bit boring. But I found out in my second year in New York that Manhattan closes down. Thanksgiving is the only day where Manhattan totally closes down. You can't do anything. No bars, no coffee shops, nothing is open. So you sit there in your apartment, which is very, very small, and you just have nothing to do. So in the second year, I was like, okay, maybe I check this Thanksgiving thing out. And my aunt invited me to my family big Thanksgiving party. And quite frankly, I was a bit disappointed because I felt that, you see so much, there's so much commercial and so much visual material about Thanksgiving that you see these tables hanging over with food and this huge turkey in the middle. And, there was a turkey, which I give it to her. But everything else was, from my European perspective, very pragmatic and very straightforward. It's like a potluck style of meal, so everybody brings something. It was all put on the table, so it was like a buffet, I guess. And then, people eat, people get up, people watch TV, people do this. So from my point, I was like, this is not a tradition. This is just like a random dinner thing. And then obviously also for us Europeans, we like to separate the cultural and the commercial very much. But in Thanksgiving, it's all about Black Friday and Cyber Monday and things like that. So I was like, okay, that's whatever. That's not this is really superficial. And I didn't really connect it with it. But where I did feel American tradition really happens and is really alive is when you go to university or when you go to college. And I don't know, we all have seen all these movies, and I don't know how you feel about it. I still don't understand what they're talking about when they talk about their clubs and sports teams and all the leagues and debate, whatever. And it's like there's so much going on in these colleges and so much, these kind of substructures that really is kind of, to me, that is American culture and American tradition in the making, this time in college. And if you talk to any American, anybody in the room that I'm talking for you all the time? Anyway, maybe later. Most people will say that was the best time of my life, college, university. That's when really things happened and, when I was alive. So I was really impressed with like how much attention to detail and how much focus was there and how much it was carried by the overall culture. Because I feel like, again, we in Europe have a tendency to say like, oh, university, people are not old enough to really know about culture and these kind of heavy things. So I felt like, this is the place to really come in touch with American tradition. And what I especially found interesting is that I studied industrial design at a fashion design school, but that's a different story. But when I looked at my course catalog, I had to take liberal art classes to become a well-rounded person. And there were classes like hip-hop, history of hip-hop, and the male villain role in the soap opera of the 80s and whatever. And you're like, what? It's all this popular culture which is academically taught and discussed, where you think like, wow, it's amazing. How can people be so open and so non-cynical and really take that serious? Because my experience, again, in Germany, and might have changed, I don't know, was that popular culture, pop culture by itself is kind of a condescending term, and then it's like youth culture, or it's we have this differentiation in Germany with E und U music, like what is it, ernste Musik und Unterhaltungsmusik. So serious music and entertaining music, which is, who does that? You know, I mean, what does that mean? So anything that's entertaining can be serious. So we have this kind of like a split in our minds with this kind of pop culture and real culture, I think, which I saw here in the United States really coming together and really growing and being formed like in front of my eyes, which I found super fascinating. So that was my time in New York, obviously in a nutshell. But so what I really wanted to point out is what did that mean for me as a designer and in my job. And what it really means is, I put it in a diagram, which is pretty simple and straightforward. So as a designer or as anybody who has to do with any product development, you have always this kind of funnel diagram. It's like you start with the innovation part, and then you go through a process to get to a product. And this is, in the company, is the gate process or whatever they call it, where you have meetings and steps to get to the product. And so, you know, you normally draw, when you draw this process, you draw it with a funnel, because it means that there's many ideas that are coming in that you are looking at and you're evaluating, and you decide which idea you take and take forwards to the end. So it gets slimmer to the end. And in the US, my feeling was the funnel was endlessly wide. You know, like any idea was cool, everything was possible, anything could be discussed, which is really, really exciting, because you feel this being non-judgmental about things is really liberating and lifts weight off yourself. On the other hand, it's also really frustrating, because it kind of then always ends up here and not never, but you know, doesn't easily make it forward. So that would be my conclusion to the American culture as I saw it, that really there's so much focus on young, on new ideas and shaping their own culture, that sometimes things that really like pulling things through and really getting something to the end gets forgotten, because there's the next new thing and the next cool thing that people think about. And I think for me and my European friends in New York, that was always a little bit frustrating, to see this kind of like, okay, yesterday we talked about this, and today everybody wants to talk about that. Let's just finish the discussion about this. But there was something new and better to talk about. And one final thing I want to say about my American experience in terms of tradition is, for me, the greatest American tradition I know is small talk. And it's funny, because small talk is something that gets Germans so upset, because it's this inefficient way of communicating with no knowledge being transferred and no point. And I get it, and I get both sides, but I think my theory, and you can tell me that I'm totally wrong, my theory is that, you know, America is a diverse country, and there's other diverse countries, and Germany is obviously not such a diverse country. But in a diverse country, you don't know the background of the person you're going to talk to, and you have no idea about their values, about their experiences, whatever. So you need to find this little piece that you can talk about, that you don't offend, that you don't challenge, that you don't talk about something the person doesn't know about. And that's how you're feeling right now, how you're going to feel tomorrow, what you did yesterday, you know, these little things. And if people are really good at it, small talk, it's amazing, because it's like it's like a mating dance, you know, even if it's like people who don't, you know, it's just like in the elevator, but it's like, and you have this little back and forth, and I find it totally fascinating. And there's the small talk on steroids, which is bantering, you know, like to have banter with somebody. So it's like when you put a little bit of a fun twist to it and you make a little bit fun of each other. And I think it's amazing, because you really kind of learn about the other person without having to, you know, have some common ground in topics. So I think that's really fascinating, and something that we dismiss a lot here in this cultural area, but I think there's a lot of value to it. Okay, so back to me, which is the most important topic today, obviously. I'm going to say that a couple of times. In my life, so I was in New York for 10 years, and then being German, typical German, I started to worry. I was thinking, this is too much fun and too little focus. And I have my whole life ahead of me. There's a career I want to, you know, I had all these great ideas. So it needs to hurt a little bit somehow. And it didn't hurt. So no, the real reason really was that I felt, because of that diagram I showed, I was a bit frustrated with my job, because there was so much. Basically, as a designer, you are only doing concepts and great ideas, and never make anything to the end. That was my experience. So I said, okay, enough of that. I need something new. And the total opposite offered itself up to me, and somebody back there had the same experience with me. So I got an offer from Panasonic to go to Tokyo and work as a international specialist was the title. Basically, it's the foreign designer who doesn't look Japanese and looks good in all the company pictures. So that was me. So there might still be some brochures from Panasonic from the 90s. Anyway, but you know, I got the offer, and obviously I didn't know anything about Japan, and I was really just drawn by the fact that I knew Panasonic is a company that makes a ton of products, and if I go there as a designer, I will see something that I make on the shelf, and that's all I wanted to do. So I went to Tokyo, and I met Janina, who was there at the same time. And you know, the first thing, and that it's such a cliche, but it's so true, is Japan is the land of contrast, right? It's like you have the newest technologies, and you have the craziest products, and then you have really people still running around in kimonos around you, and you have these little food places that serve the same sauce to their meatballs that they served 250 years ago. And it's all there, and it's all harmonious with each other, which is amazing. So you have this contrast between all the new and between totally dorky in a way and totally cool. But the Japanese are obviously very aware that they're very special, and they keep telling you that, you know, this is the Japanese way of doing it, and oh, we're doing it differently, we're doing it in the Japanese way. And so you get taught very quickly that, wow, you have some certain, there's this Japanese kind of unifying cultural level that nobody else can penetrate, and you're just always going to be there and watch it, and you watch this perform, and you're not part of it, but it's fascinating to see it. And to me, one typical story was, and I wonder if you heard that story too. So Japanese attach tradition and culture to everything, you know, and you will be told that everything has a reason, and there's a reason this is like that, and it's not handled differently. So one story I heard, and I heard it more than once, is the escalator story, is why in Osaka people stand on the left side of the escalator and walk on the right, and in Tokyo they stand on the right side and people walk on the left. And the tradition behind that is that Tokyo is a town that the heritage is samurais, and in Osaka the heritage is merchants. So in Osaka, and you have your, wait, I have to get this right, you have your sword on the left side and your money thing on the right side. So you know, you get the idea. So one side wants to hide the money side. Are you Japanese, may I ask? Oh, sumimasen, gomen ne. You don't know this one?
I didn't know about this narrative.
Oh, so okay. Okay. Anyway, but at least then you can say that I'm say it wrong. But so the money thing is on one side and the sword is on the other side, and what you do is basically you try to protect that, right? And I heard the story. Did you hear it? Oh man. Anyway, okay. I heard it more than once, and then I was like, escalators? How long are they around, really? You know, and you know, I mean, you can imply the same story for anything, for steps and whatever, but still, you know, I think it was to me very much a sign of this, that everything has a context to it and everything has a story behind it, which you know is fascinating. But sometimes for foreigners, I think you also have to get that filter off and say like, whoa, what am I seeing here, really? And my favorite tradition, and I think it's a very universal Japanese tradition, is hanami, which is flower watching. And I apologize for the bad kanji.
Well, it's fun.
But you know, for me, I mean, this is, you know, what's so fascinating is that, so hanami is the word, and hanami means the holiday or the activity of flower watching, which is a tradition. It's when you have the cherry blossoms about 2 years every year. You basically go to the park with the group, a social group. It could be your work group, it could be your family, and you sit under the trees and you watch the flowers. And it's a long tradition. And so hanami is the word for it, and hana is flower, and mi is eye or watching. So it's, you know, that's the German interpretation of this. Doesn't look so nice, but you get the idea. And you know, it's a really beautiful activity, and it's just a fun party, really. I mean, what it is. But when you hear more about it, it gets a bit almost a little dark, because the idea is that the flowers symbolize, or the blossoms symbolize the beauty, and the Japanese cherry tree doesn't have fruits, so it's really just beauty for its own sake that comes once a year and blossoms. And you watch it and see it and admire it, and then it goes away and it fades away and it dies and it rots, and it's a bit, that's when, and then so this the transcendence of these flowers is being celebrated, and with it is this kind of like it starts, it goes away, and there's no meaning behind it. It's just beauty for beauty's sake, and you watch it. And it's also about change, because it talks about the seasons and the change of seasons. So there's this idea that nothing is permanent, anything goes away eventually, and there's no use in holding on to things too long, because life is about change. And that's to me, a really, really important little piece of knowledge, that life is about change, because I think that changes your attitude to many, many different things. And so this flower watching was really fascinating. And as I said, in the end, it's a party, and it's people bring canned beer and small snacks and just have fun. But the story behind it is really deep and thoughtful. I don't remember where I read it, and I Googled it, and it's not a quote, but it's not from me. But I thought it's so beautiful, and I tried to make it like a calligraphy. Didn't work, but I still took the slide. But I think the graceful acceptance of the banality of life is really such an essence that I found and that I felt. It's like, life goes by, things change. There's really not much that you can do about it, but you have to accept it. And by accepting it, you let go, So that was this openness to change that was kind of built into the culture that I felt. On the other hand, this is what we... and I don't think many Japanese have experienced that. But so I worked at Panasonic, which is one of the most traditional companies in Japan. And they, at the time when I started there and when Nina was there, they actually still did this morning exercise as a team. So you get up and there's a music playing over the intercom, and people stretch and move. And everybody does it in how you say it, like synchronized. Thank you. Synchronized. That's the word. And so again, you sit there and like, whoa, where am I? What's going on? And people do it. And the thing is, to me, it's like, the immediate gut reaction is like, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. That's dorky or whatever. And like the cool people do it, the not so cool people, everybody does it. Like everybody gets up, everybody's the same in the moment and does it. And after that, actually, there's more. There was the speech. No, wait. There was the song. There's a song coming over the intercom, which is the company song, which is a Japanese song, which I didn't understand much of. But there was always the word Panasonic in it, where my part came. And so everybody sings the song, and then the song is over, and then the head of the section, where you have these open plan offices, steps up in front and wishes everybody a good morning and productive morning, and that we all try to do the best for the company. And it's all things where you're like, wow, it's a bit militaristic maybe, and it feels like, especially in Germany with our culture and our recent tradition, it's like, oh, that's too much order, too much, somebody telling you what to do. But on the other side, to me, it really meant that this kind of discipline really led to a real democratic setting, because everybody was the same. There was not one was more important than the other. And everybody had to do this. There was no exceptions, even me. I had to do it. And so it really made the group democratic in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And I really liked. The downside to that is then, and that's another that's another proverb, a Japanese proverb, which you probably did hear before, that the thing is that the nail, right? So when one nail sticks out, it gets hammered in. That's also something you hear a lot, which is basically if you try to be different from the group, you get put into order, which is, obviously not such a optimistic way of looking at things. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I really admired this democracy and this kind of this idea that everybody has exactly the same rights and the same way of looking at things. And from my understanding, where this comes from is, Japan is a country that's built on the fault lines and has earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, whatever. And really people know that as an individual or new, there's nothing you can do against these things. The only way you can deal with this kind of extreme natural setting is when you really behave as a group. So the group is very important. It's life supporting in this sense, because if you want to be that one guy who's different, wait till the next earthquake and you sit there and nobody's supporting you, and so it makes a lot of sense in that perspective. But yeah, it was definitely a culture shock for me. So again, what did that mean for my job? So my experience was in Japanese are really good, or Japanese companies are really good, and they still are, in taking something, defining it, saying this is what we want to do, and bringing it to the future and building it. It's that's why you have so many products. So that's why you have so many variations of things. And actually, what's really interesting is in a company like Panasonic, this idea of, I got an email, sorry about that. This idea of brand and consistency is really frowned upon. There's always, like, after 2 or 3 ideations of a product where you try to build something, a brand language, people say, oh, we need something totally different. Otherwise, people get bored. So this change is really refreshing, because it's exactly the opposite what we have here, where it's like, oh, are you sure people can accept that new corner there? And they've seen it before. So that's really nice. But what I would criticize, or what I found lacking sometimes, was that the definition of what is the next new. And that's because everybody's so democratic and everybody has the same rights, or is seen as a level in a big company at a certain level. There is no encouragement for one person to step up and say, I have a good idea, because that's the nail that's sticking out, right? So nobody does that, or very few people. I mean, again, this is a while ago, and I know things are changing too, but this was my impression there, that nobody would do that. And so a lot of the ideas are actually fed by top management, which is not really in touch with the market, but it's, they're the ones who can say this is what we do. Or what we all know is, like, you looked at another company, or what are the others doing, because that seems to be right. So that's really sad, because I think you have this amazing pipeline in place where you get new things out, but if you don't start at the right point, all that might not make such a big difference. As a real life example that I experienced, that we worked on, for example, of a product that would never have made it to market anywhere else. This is Joba. It's basically, the idea is it simulates horse riding, and it's supposed to strengthen your core muscles. And it was a super seller. This was in Asia. This did really well. But the idea, how it came to life, is that somebody said it's good for your golf swing. And if you think about who thinks about golf swing, it's not your typical innovation design person, but somebody high up. So anyway, so that was how this came to life. And it came to life, and it did really well. But again, in this really kind of weird way to go forward. Anyway, so my time is running out. So now I'm back in this beautiful town, and I'm very glad to meet all of you here. I've been back for 3 years, and I can tell you one thing, and I probably know that some of you have experienced it. The reversed culture shock is a real thing. I was like, this is just a way to make yourself important. But it's really, like, the funniest thing is that I've lived 20 years abroad, and I come back, and a lot of things that I thought were special about me, I'm like, no, that's German, So you find actually that there's a lot of things that are in my culture and in my upbringing that shape me as a person that I didn't know are so widespread, basically. I think I owe you one more slide to say how I look at German innovation, or at German going forward. And I honestly, this is a stupid graphic, but it's so hard here to get anything off the ground, because people always are so comfortable just saying what's bad about things. And it's just really frustrating to see that, because and I think there's a saying that, what is it? Criticism is the best. Anyway, it's a bad saying anyway. Doesn't matter. But so this idea of just shooting things down, and how I interpret that is that basically people are so comfortable with what we have and so proud of what we have, and are so worried about changing things, that any idea that is new has to, before it even exists, prove that it would make things better on all in all perspectives, and that's impossible. That's impossible. You have to try things, and you have to make things, and you have to just give things a try, and then you can say it worked or it doesn't. But I think we're very comfortable in believing that we can synthesize things in our head and predict, like, yeah, that's not gonna, that's not gonna help now. And it's really, as I said, I find it a bit disappointing and frustrating. And my example here from the German media, I'm reading a lot of newspapers, as you can see, is that, the Frankfurter Allgemeine is, if there's any small innovation in the market, a new online pay service, whatever, there will be an article how this is going to ruin the culture. And it's just like, and actually it's always the same guy, I found out, but still, I find it so depressing that, like, give it a chance, look at the bright side, but it's very, very hard. So I really wish that we as Germans can learn from other cultures there to be more open, to understand that change is a part of life, and to be more open to forming our own culture and our own traditions, and not just saying traditions is something that we import from the past and we have to just guard it and can't change it. So that's basically my final message, and I want to thank you very much for listening. So, and then am I supposed to take questions? Yeah? Oh, okay. Oh, shit.
So
Not you. I'm joking.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will open the floor, so if you have any questions, please do ask, do interact. It was so inspiring. I hope that it was as inspiring to you that it was to me. Thank you so much. So please, let's make this even more creative, and then of course we will hang out around later on, so you can also talk to Philipp one-to-one, but please, let's open the floor.
So you ended up on a critical note about the German culture regarding innovation, and I'm coming from also a different culture from Central East Europe, and I share some of those impressions you mentioned. On the other hand, what I see in the corporate world, and I guess as product designer you do work with some technology companies, that there is a lot of energy put in to make this right, to create innovation a little bit out of the box. And we know all these big companies creating startups or investing into startups or creating fake startups within the company. So how do you see that, this type of, this let's do this somehow movement?
I do think it's great. I think that and that's why I have a job here and why we're working here. Actually, I did not mention about what we do here. So this is our company. The Deep Bench is. I basically have a business partner who's sick today, unfortunately, and she's an expert in branding, and I'm a designer. So we're trying to combine these two fields to help people innovate, and so we live off that, and it's important that that happens. But a lot of it, I think, is not a lot of it, but some of it is lip service. And really important to me is that you have to innovate appropriately for your culture, and you have to consider your culture. And it doesn't work like that you just say, okay, we buy a startup here, or we buy this here, or hey, we start with like these brainstorm meetings every day, if you still have the same people doing it, It's not as easy as just importing a process or a tool and just saying, now that's going to fix it. You have to really start with the people. And I think Germans love process and are really, into that. So they sometimes take process over really content. In that respect, and I'm being very critical. I'm sorry about that. I was gone too long. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And maybe a follow-up. Have you seen any story in Germany that makes you believe that it's working, or a story that makes you enthusiastic?
Actually, I'm not pessimistic about. I'm sure it's going to work, and because there's a lot going on and there's a lot of potential, and in the end, the process is very important to get things. That's what I said about. That's why also about Japan. Japan is always going to do great because they know how to get things done, and how to really work things out and get into the detail. And Germany is very, very similar in that sense. So I'm not worried, because I think sometimes we overestimate the idea. In an economic sense, we overestimate it because it's not always the first one who wins, right? So in an economic sense, I'm not worried, but from a cultural sense, I think the attitude would help to just be more open and more welcoming and for change and new ideas. Any other questions?
Do you think it's possible for, because I think when, like these two diagrams you have, or the way you described Japan and Germany, that in Japan they're able to really move into the future with tradition staying alive, but in Germany there's that fear of moving into the future and losing the tradition. I'm working with some big German brands like BMW, probably everyone who lives in Munich works with BMW, and I think this is really their fear. They think it's not possible to be like it is in Japan. You know, it's not possible to be totally in the future and
still
keep that tradition. I'm wondering if you think, can Germany become like Japan in that sense, or do you think that's only possible in that specific culture?
Well, again, I think it will happen because it's all economically driven. So, you know, the change will be forced on, and it is happening, and we see it here in our work. I thought about that a lot. You're kind of, I think what your question gets, and why does it work in Japan and it doesn't work in Germany? And I think, and this is just my gut feeling, but I think in Japan a lot of the traditional part has a real solid, and that was my example with the Hanami, the philosophical foundation, you know. While when we in Germany, I don't know if that's there so much. I mean, it's the Christian values, but in the end, traditions is a very tangible thing, you know. There's when we talk about tradition, it's and that's also when you think about Thanksgiving, you know, my reaction was like, this is not a tradition because there's not enough structure, not enough, there's no speech, there's no thing that you hold up, you know, no object that has to, except the turkey. But you know what I mean? So I think we are in Germany very, very literal around traditions, maybe. But again, I'm not the expert there. But that's my feeling, that it's less literal in Japan and more, there's more wiggle room in many things in that sense around the culture.
Do you ever feel the urge to copy one tradition from one place that you were and try to implement it on the next place that you were? Like you were in the USA and then was in Japan. So you try to bring some traditions and some culture to this process, or you just isolated and studied it and applied to?
No, me personally, you mean how I behaved? You have to ask Janina, she worked with me. Probably not always perfect, but I don't think that works. I think you have to, wherever you go, you have to adapt. I mean, you know, you have to keep your personal freedom for yourself, that is important, but this, and in Japan you see that a lot. You see a lot of foreigners in Japan who's like, I'm going to do it my way, and you know, and it doesn't work like that. It's like you are in a different society, you are a guest, you know, you're in a different society, so either you adapt or you should probably go home, you know, if it doesn't work, because it makes you unhappy. And I've seen it, I've been there in certain moments where you're like, okay, this is not working for me, this doesn't work with my values. But to try to change a whole society, or, you know, to influence, you know, yeah, in your own, of course, in your circle of friends and whatever.
The way your process goes, so bring a better process to a process that doesn't work so well, maybe disrupt this process, even in your small bubble.
Of course, and in my sense, that was why I was hired. So after Panasonic, I worked 5 years in Japan for 3M, which is an American company, innovation company. They, you know, their way of surviving is really thinking about next technologies, and then they think about application. And so I was hired in Japan as a designer to work with the scientists there to show them how else to come up with new ideas that are not just scientifically driven, but from a user perspective and so on. So yes, I had to do that, but it's hard, you know, it's really hard. It's kind of hard when you are a foreigner and you bring in the new, you know, like in a way it shields you, but also it's easy then to dismiss you. It's like, oh, it's the foreigner, you know, with his stupid ideas. And that's what we do, that's what everybody does, right? It's like you group yourself into comfortable circles. So I find that hard to try to change groups.
So your diagram is really makes sense of what you show, like US and America and German, because I'm also like feeling same in German when I work with the German people, so it's really interesting. So I'm interested in when you work in the company in Japan, so how Japanese people want you to do have an opinion, or like for example, the German aspect is very European aspect is very interesting for Japanese people because very different idea, like what always thinking, like also opposite, like German people interested in Japanese thinking also, like, so it's very interesting. The company, what's the interesting of you, like when you are talking with Japanese people. So you said it's better to adapt in Japan, but for maybe like Japanese people want to have some European thinking.
Yes, and this is a very interesting question because you're right, but not constantly, you know? And it's the same for us, you know, like we are fascinated by certain cultures, but it's a dose, it's about how much, right? So if you work together, you basically, it's like, you know, in Japan, if you work together, you're really together a lot of time. So you don't want this other guy always to be the challenger, always to be the one, but where I come from, you know, so that's why, you know, why I think the best strategy, if you can, and it's not always possible, you have to adapt. And of course, it doesn't mean you have to throw away your values, but you have to really choose your battles and use it when it's, because if you're always the one, and we met people like that, there is people who are always the doubter, always the criticizer, always, you know, and at some point nobody's listening anymore because, you know, it's just a repeat. So I think that what you said, the interest in the other culture goes away when you're with that person all the time, you know, or it goes down a little bit. Yeah.
Being your guest here and also a little bit trained in American small talk, which I appreciate a lot, but sometimes it's a little bit on the surface, which is sometimes being German also not that easy to take in. I'm interested because you mentioned you work together here with a branding expert or branding marketing person. Because when I then thought about your lecture, which was very inspiring and interesting because it's based on values and identity and culture. So how do you successfally start to work to, my first question would be, what do you do?
Okay,
I don't know anything about your background, and it's a nice small talk question to start with. And how can you be successful? Because this is a really early stage then, I guess, you start to work with companies, or an early stage of changing your opinion, your setting, your positioning. So how can you be successful with all of this in your mind and experience?
You mean it should mess me up and at this point? No, so I think what I would say, what I gained from all this is you always have an outside perspective, which is very healthy to anything, right? Which is also very dangerous because you need some safe space, but it's good to have that for business, definitely, and for work. It's good to have an outside perspective on things. So I think that's what helps me to do my job. And
what is your job?
And my job is, so I'm a designer, so there's four of us, and we basically, we try to help companies with projects that combine design and brand in one project. So a lot of them is not so much about designing a product. We do that too, but it's more about the strategy. You know, what is the foundation? What do you want to communicate? So that's where the brand comes in. What is your brand? What is the product? How do you want to communicate yourself to the market? And how should that all come together? So it's more the strategic part behind that.
Can you talk about one example, if it's not confidential?
I can talk to you later. No, we have a project with BMW where we basically look at how one of their values, how do you bring that to the market and could bring that to life, basically. But it's a very strategic approach, and not, you know, we don't design keychains or cars or anything.
It's strategy. I'm also, like you mentioned before, I used to work 20 years for BMW. But I'm on my own since 9 years now, but also very strategic, and I was always in advance, and also in New York. A couple of years head of a design think tank studio, so I know a little bit also these two worlds. And when you spoke about America, for me it was always East-West Coast and all.
Oh, that's another, that's a whole, it is, totally, definitely.
Like the appearance and people, how they think and how they react, and New York is still more a little bit about old money, maybe, and playing around with that. And this fashion and culture is completely different than the
no, definitely. No, it's a big difference. I agree. But I was more on the East Coast, so. And do you do what? Also.
Okay, let's take this one final question, and then again, we're hanging here a little bit longer then, so if you have more questions, I think everyone is so inspired. Please hang out around, but let's have this one last final question, and then have some more coffee, pretzels, and...
More personal question.
Personal question, ooh.
So,
Okay.
you had one slide that said home sweet home.
Yeah.
So home is obviously a place, but also a feeling.
Yes.
And being away for so long, how do you hold on to that feeling?
You don't. I think you lose it. Actually, home is family, and you know I have family here, and I have a lot of really good friends here, which I'm really lucky from going to school, high school here, that I never lost contact. So that's home. But the place, you know, honestly, it's exchangeable. To me, I like Munich is a beautiful city, but I don't have that feeling anymore that it's my, you know, that it's a home for me as a city.
Okay, so it's not. So what's your home?
I don't have, as a place, I wouldn't know how to answer that right now, which is probably a problem for me. Yeah. Now that you say it, thank you for bringing that up. Oh. Okay.